Who knew you could get first-time jitters again? Yes, I am constantly putting myself in positions where I'm nervous all over again, and today is one of those days. Welcome to Try Beginner's Luck, Ask a Coach. Yeah, it's a little bit different. Why are we doing this? Why are we having this segment called Ask a Coach? Well, I think it's important because coaching is such an integral part of sport. And it's also a barrier for some people to get a coach. And so I wanted to, at its simplest form, to try to get your questions answered from a coach if you don't already have a coach or don't have access to a coach. But I also think there's coaches who have very different thought processes on how to get an athlete to the finish line. And so I think it's important to bring people of various mindsets together because personalities matter. There can be a personality clash, and we'll talk about all this on how to select a coach. But I think it's important to have people who have different personalities. They may disagree on coaching philosophies. Who knows? This could be like the Jerry Springer of coaches. I don't know what this is going to be, but I ask you to join me in this journey and making sure that you get what you need. If you have a question, there's always going to be a link in the comments or in the information bio where you can submit your questions so that they can be answered. If you're willing to flow with me and to flow with the two coaches that we have here, I believe we will equally be successful. We do have this saying, whenever you try beginners luck, you always win. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is a win because we're trying something different. And I hope that you receive it in the way that it's meant to be delivered. Without further ado, I also want to say that these will be very short, keeping them to 15 to 20 minutes. So we have to get a lot of information in a short period of time, which means I have to shut up right now. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our coaches. Our resident coaches for Ask a Coach are two phenomenal people who are so dear to me. Maria Simone, you've heard her. You know her as the Dot. She helps with the Try Beginner's Luck podcast. And she is the owner and head coach of No Limit Endurance Coaching. She is a USA Triathlon Level 2 coach, US Cycling Level 2, and US Master Swimming certified coach. And y'all, she's smart. She has a PhD in communication. Yep, she does. But she also leads a team of coaches with her team. She has 8 coaches up under her. We're going to get into what her philosophy is and why she's even in this sport. So hold your horses. Next is Lloyd Henry. Now, Lloyd Henry, I met during my first marathon in 2015. I was scared. I began trying beginner's luck with the Marine Corps Marathon. And I remember him walking me through, it's going to be okay, and making sure that I was calm before the start of the race, because that was the year where they had security barricades and you had to go through security and the line was so long. And in my mind, I got there early so that I could be in the right seat so that I could have the best opportunity to set myself up for success. Well, as you would know it, you can only prepare as much as you can prepare. And everything that the day handles you, you have to handle accordingly. So Lloyd Henry was there and we've stayed in contact. He's also my coach and he has been in the sport for a while. He's done 33 Ironman. He has the first African-American to finish an Ironman on all 6 continents, including World Championship. He is from St. Croix, the Virgin Islands. He has a BS in biology, an MS in medical science, a PMP, and an MBA. So he's smart too, y'all. I don't mess with nobody that's not smart. I got smart people who are going to be helping you coach. And I'm going to be learning with y'all because I feel like I'm a sponge and just want to keep learning. So welcome to Try Beginner's Luck. Ask a Coach, Maria and Lloyd Henry.
Thanks for
Welcome,
having
y'all.
me.
Yeah.
Thanks for the invite.
Well, I am so excited to have y'all, and I think it's so important to have two people who are varying in styles, right? Let's just get right into it. This is going to be like me interviewing you for the first time, even though we have talked to you both on the Try Beginner's Luck podcast, but just to catch up new people who might not have heard the podcast yet. So, would you both tell me more about your athletic journey in the sport of triathlon? And either one of you can go first.
I think we're both being overly polite.
Are we going to fight it out? What's happening here?
Go
Okay,
for it,
fine.
Maria.
I got it. How y'all
It'll
are
be
the
like
coaches? You're leaving
this is
me.
like
Okay,
this
let's
is
go. We'll
this
go
is
with
turning
ladies
into
first.
the opposite
Maria,
of a
will
Jerry
you
Springer
please share
show.
with us?
Neither one of us want to like step on each other's toes.
Take it away, Maria.
Thank you, Coach Lloyd. So, Mashonda, after all that, can you repeat the question?
Listen, and that's another thing. You got to be okay with stuff going wrong, right? Like that's a part of triathlon and problem solving, all this good stuff. So the question was, tell us how you got into sport essentially. Like some people might not have heard your segment on the podcast, and we just want to catch people up to speed about how you got into sport before we get into questions. We want people to get to know you.
Okay. And when you say get into sport, like initially or triathlon specifically?
Good question.
Because it was a dark and stormy night when I first got into sport. And I don't know if you want me to fast forward.
Actually, let's talk about your athletic journey because I think that's important. Let's talk about the athletic journey.
Okay. So my first sport experience was in high school when I chose to join our high school rowing team, our crew team. Some of you who have seen me in the one-to-one are probably wondering how I wound up as a rower because I'm short, fun-sized, as one of my athletes likes to call it. Rowers tend to be taller, but in high school, it's less of an issue. So I did row crew in high school and had phenomenal coaching at that level in high school that I went to, and it was really an excellent experience for me. I would not be exaggerating if I said that sport saved my life probably at that time. I had a pretty severe eating disorder and was heading down a really dangerous path starting my freshman year of high school at probably like 80 something pounds. And even though I'm short, I was definitely not healthy at all at that weight. And I remember going to one of the initial crew practices, and the head coach at the time, where they were running us through like a series of movement analysis, basically, just to kind of see where we were. And we had to do these bench rows, which basically you hang over a bench and you row up into the bench. I couldn't even do one, and they wanted you to do 10. And he said to me, you have a choice. And looking back, I'm like, I wonder if he knew that I had a problem. I was pretty thin looking and probably not healthy looking. But he said to me, you have a choice. I think that, we need you to build some muscle, be strong. Can you do that? And he didn't say you need to gain weight. He didn't say you're too light. He said, we need you to be strong. And that language choice, I think, clicked in my little 13-year-old head. And that's what I sought out to do. So it's really no small exaggeration to say on that day, I began recovery from having an eating disorder without realizing that. Like I was too young and too immature to really understand what was happening. But went on to learn that I am hyper competitive. I love competing in sport. And when I say hyper competitive, it doesn't mean unfriendly. It just means once the starting gun goes off, it's on like Donkey Kong for me. I don't know how to not race. So it's really kind of fun. Fast forward quite a few years, go through college, life, trying to become a young professional. I was in my 30s. And all this time, when I was in crew, I was like, I want to run a marathon. Like I loved running. Everyone else on my boat thought running was punishment. I loved to run. I thought it was super fun. So I did eventually run that marathon, and I called marathon the gateway drug because after I crossed that finish line, I was like, what's next? what else am I doing? And then I got a little bit into ultra running, and then eventually found triathlon. I think my first triathlon, I was probably 36 or 37 years old, and like runners, I got injured. And my husband said to me, "You should go swim." And my response was, "With my face in the water?" And for context for that, I grew up on the beach, so we always swam to save our lives, but never with our face in the water. So uh, I went to Dick's Sporting Goods and bought like those obnoxiously large goggles that they sell there that swimmers don't wear, and found my way to the pool. And I was like, I'm a big bad marathoner, I'm a big bad ultra runner. How hard is this going to be? 25 yards later, I learned how hard it was going to be. Very, very hard to get into that. So that's kind of how I found triathlon.
Okay, Coach Lloyd?
Oh, well, I really didn't have much of an athletic background until I found the sport of triathlon. Um, just normal, regular fitness as a kid. By the time you go to school, you graduate, you go into the real world and start to work, you realize your metabolism just isn't the same. And what you used to do, you realize you can't do anymore. So I realized that fitness that I took for granted in my younger days went away when I realized I could no longer run and catch the train to get to work. It was like, oh man, it was easy. I could just show up and run it down. And, then it was like, wow, I'm starting to miss the train because you can't even run down the, down the block. After that, it set in. One of my siblings challenged me to get in shape. In her words, I was too young to be that out of shape. So she challenged me to do a triathlon, and there was one in St. Croix at the time. So I was like, "Oh, you know what? What's so hard about doing that? It's the things that we did as kids. Swim, bike, run is no big deal." But I didn't realize how much of a challenge it was. So, I trained for the first one, and once I did that, I was just completely hooked on endurance sports. And once I got that first one done, I haven't looked back. It was just uh so much of a joy to accomplish something as an adult, because as an adult, I hadn't tried anything that I struggled with for a long time. Everything you do, you kind of know what you're doing. But once I got into the sport of triathlon, it was a big learning curve of all the things that you thought you knew, but you really didn't know how to do.
Yeah, so what it sounds like is that triathlon and just sport in general really helped to reshape who you were as people and individuals. And I think I can say that those that are still doing triathlon year after year, that's the thing. Sport can change your life. And if you have good coaching, to Maria's point, that coach can really change something in you. Or to Lloyd's point, you can have a challenge from a family member, and that can spark the track. We all have different triggers that allows us to get into sport and allow us to push further or harder. I don't want this to sound elementary to anyone who might be listening, but I want to go back to the very basics because this is Ask a Coach. And so those people who will be listening to this segment may not know anything about the sport. So, what is triathlon? Like, let's just go back to the basics. What is this sport that you have to swim, bike, run with?
Well, right now we have in triathlon three different disciplines that come together to make one event. So you have a swim, it can be a pool or open water. You have a bike ride, and then it's followed up by a run. And once you put all three back to back, then that's what we're calling a triathlon. The distances vary, just like in running road races. So you kind of decide, based on your athletic endeavors, your fitness level, what is the right distance that calls to you, and then you pick that event and sign up. But it's going to be just as simple as it sounds. You're just going to swim. You're going to get finish swimming. You're going to ride your bike. Once you finish riding the bike, you're going to go for a run.
Awesome. So now I want Maria. It's swim, bike, run, but then there's something else in between that people sometimes get confused about. Can you tell people about that thing in between so that you can get to each of the sports?
It sounds like you're talking about transition.
Thing. But
Right. So
it's also called what else? Because sometimes people get, well, what is this? Transition is also called T1, T2. So just for
oh,
those
right.
of you,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
So you may sometimes see it referred to as T1 and T2. T1 being the transition between swim and bike, T2 being the transition between bike and run. And there's a couple different physical issues as well as logistical issues that happen in transition. It's not complicated. However, it requires practice because the first time you do it, the first time I ran off the bike in training, for example, I felt like I was a crab going sideways. Even though I was definitely going forward, it felt like my legs were going sideways. It felt very peculiar. And similarly, so the transition from swim to bike, I think the transition from swim to bike, even in more experienced circles, gets underrated. That there is definitely a cost of the swim relative to the bike. So there are some physical things that you want to train for. Simply practice it and it becomes easier. But then on the logistical side, setting up transition, how you want your shoes to be, your helmet, how you take your wetsuit off if it's a wetsuit legal race. And that's not always easy. I've fallen on my face quite a few times trying to get the wetsuit off without question. So again, I think none of it is overly complicated, but it's things that require practice. And it's also, I think, what makes some of your first triathlon experiences some of the most fun because you have the best stories about things that happen in transition or what happened at the start of the swim or, I wouldn't be embarrassed about first time stories. I would embrace them because if you talk to any experienced triathlete, they're going to love to hear what happened. And then they're going to want to tell you what happened to them.
Yeah, you always have to question someone who doesn't have any embarrassing early career stories. You wonder, like, did you really participate in the sport? Because that just doesn't, it doesn't pass the smell test right there if you don't have some funny situations that happened earlier on.
So true.
I.e., I remember a guest came on our show, and more recently, one of the pros, both of them exited T2 with their helmet on. So they became helmet runners while they were on the course. Now, you would think, one was a legit beginner, that was Tisa Holly, and then Sarah Karpinski, who's now a professional. Both of them had helmet head stories. So it can happen to anybody. Anything can happen in your T1. And to Lloyd and Maria's point, we all have a funny story about transition. All right. So now I hear a lot about multisport versus triathlon, or is triathlon multisport? Would you two break down multisport versus triathlon and all of the events that can be considered under the multisport umbrella?
So I think they've tried to do an attempt to get more and more people involved in the sport of triathlon and under the umbrella of multisport. So when we refer to multisport, we're just thinking about doing more than one sport at a time. So you have a lot of disciplines. You can swim, bike, run, row, lots of different athletic activities. When you start to do more than one of them as a single event, that's when we're talking about multi-sports. So now you'll see things like swim run, where it's you're not biking, you're just gonna go in, you're gonna swim, you get out, you transition, you do a run. Then you have your aqua bike, where you're only going to swim and bike. right? You're getting rid of the run component for those who say, hey, you know what, my days of running are behind me. I'm just really comfortable with swimming and biking. So you have that. So you kind of alternate between those two, where you have the swim run events or the aqua bike events, to kind of, take one of the disciplines out of it.
You could also do winter triathlon, which would include a cross country ski component. So we have the winter national championships out here in Colorado. And so that is going to include like a run, a bike, usually a fat bike, depending on the terrain, and then some cross country ski. And all of it's going to be on snow. So that's kind of fun. Um, you know, agreeing 100% with Lloyd, like the idea. So I see kind of multi-sport is the most general term, and then triathlon is a type of multi-sport.
And all that's important. So again, we don't want to break this down so it's too elementary, but we want people to have a good idea. So when you're talking about what sport is, you kind of have a general idea, and you don't have to be confused or think you're not one or not the other. And just know that, again, if there's one component for you, I think now the multi-sport space is becoming so broadly enriched that you can even kayak if you can't swim in certain races. So look for races that speak to your strengths. I think that's a good thing to say. Speak to your strengths. Do y'all want to add anything to that before we move on?
I would just say it's not even just your strengths, whatever makes you happy. When you start getting into athletics, you have to find sports that bring joy to your life and things that what you actually want to do. So if you don't like doing a particular activity, there's no reason for you to force yourself to do something. Find a sport that you enjoy, and combine it with another sport that you like. And I'm sure there's an official event that will encompass both of those activities in one.
Good stuff. Next question. Who can be a triathlete?
Anyone.
I think that was
Truly anyone.
unanimous. Okay. Do you have to have any special skills? Like, do you have to have any prior athletic experience to be a triathlete? What would you say would be needed to be a triathlete?
I think you just have to decide that that's something that you want to do.
Mm.
Once you decide that it's something that you want to do, you can figure everything else out. You'll put the time in, you'll get the resources you need, but until you figure out if it's something you actually want to do, that's probably the hardest part of making that decision.
Yeah, and I think being willing to have a growth mindset and knowing that you're going to, like we just talked about transition, right? That's one example of some fun learning experiences that you'll have. Others might call it failure or mistakes. I tend to see it as learning opportunities and a way for you to grow. And I think for me, triathlon and endurance sport more generally is really a space to find out how extraordinary you can be. There's more inside each of us than we let out, and I think triathlon is uniquely suited to creating a channel for that to come out. But like Lloyd said, you have to decide you want to do it, and then put yourself out there.
And with that said, decide that you want to do it. Put yourself out there, be willing, and have a growth mindset, and you too can be a triathlete. Well, that is the end of our first episode of Try Beginner's Luck, Ask a Coach. If you have questions, like us, subscribe to our YouTube channel, go on to Try Beginner's Luck on any platform where you listen to podcasts so you can hear some stories. But be sure, if you have questions, there's a link in the comment section or bio so that you can submit your questions and get your questions answered too. That's it for us. We have Coach Maria Simone with No Limit Endurance Coaching. We have Coach Lloyd Henry with On Point Fitness, and you have me, Mashonda, the one who's here with you learning and the host of the Try Beginner's Luck podcast. That's it for us. And remember, when you try Beginner's Luck, you always win. And I'm going to add this little new caveat, but you only win when you ask questions. All right, we're out.